However, in the priestly calendar, in the priestly celebration, they had 3 additional festivals that were celebrated. And they were the Festival of New Wine, the Festival of New Oil, and the wood offering. And it tells us in the scrolls when those are to be celebrated. So here's how it works. So when you count the Omer, and the 50th day is Shavuot. When Shavuot is done, then you count 7 more weeks. And the 50th day is the Festival of New Wine. When the Festival of New Wine is done, you count 7 weeks. And the 50th day is the Festival of New Oil. And the Festival of New Oil, it specifies in the scrolls, is to be celebrated on the 6th month in the 22nd day. It's a Sunday. And then the 23rd to the 26th, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. The 23rd to the 28th, those 6 days are the designated days that you bring the wood offering. And 2 tribes of Israel were to bring the wood offering on the designated days. So 2 times 6 is 12. All right? So that's what's in the scrolls and is a part of the calendar. So, in order to make things simple today, my recommendation is that we do what we're presently doing, but we just do it according to the proper calendar. So what are we used to doing? We're used to doing Passover to Sukkot. So my recommendation is that's what we do. We don't have any custom or tradition or what we're supposed to do or how we're supposed to celebrate the new wine or the new oil. And we don't have a temple, so we don't have the wood offering to bring. All right? So that being the case, I want you all who's trying to follow along with your Bibles or on a Bible app, I want you to find Nehemiah in chapter 10 and verse 34. I'll take a moment so that you can find it. Nehemiah in chapter 10 and verse 34. So once again, that's Nehemiah chapter 10 and verse 34. So, do you believe that the Hebrew Scriptures, the Tanakh, is inspired in that it's written basically of God and He's He is the one by which the Scriptures come from? So therefore we can trust the Scriptures and the Scriptures are true? I do. All right? So that being the case, have you found Numbers chapter 10, verse 34? Yes. Yeah. All right. So it says, and we cast the lots among the priests, the Levites, and the people. We cast the lots for the wood offering, to bring it, the wood offering, into the house of our God, that is the temple, after the houses of our fathers, at the times appointed year by year, to burn upon the altar of the Lord our God. Now catch this, as is written in the Torah. It says the wood offering and bringing it year by year at the appointed time is written in the Torah. So, if we say the Torah is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, are you aware, for those of you who read and study the Torah portions each week, are you aware that anywhere in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy, it tells you when to bring the wood offering? No. It doesn't, but the text says it's written. So, is Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 34, is it in error? I don't believe it is. I believe Numbers chapter 10, verse 34 is inspired of the Lord. I believe it's true. But the text says it's written in the Torah. So now I'm going to share with you from the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is called, this is 4Q 364 and 365. And the person who translated into English put a heading of 4Q 364 and 365, an annotated law of Moses. All right? So now, in our Bibles, in Leviticus chapter 23, that chapter in telling about the festivals, the chapter ends with telling us about the 7 days of Sukkot, right? Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, here's what it says in the scrolls. In shelters or in booths you shall dwell 7 days. Every citizen of Israel shall dwell in booths, so that your descendants may know that I made your ancestors to live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So that's basically where, in the Masoretic text in Leviticus chapter 23, where the chapter ends. But look, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it continues. And it says, Then Moses spoke of the festivals of the Lord to the children of Israel. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Command the children of Israel, saying, When you come to the land that I'm about to give you as an inheritance, and where you shall dwell, securely bring wood for the whole burnt offering, and for all the work of the house that you shall build for me in the land, arranging the wood on the altar, holding the burnt offering and the calves and also the wood. For Passover sacrifices and for communion offerings and for thank offerings, for freewill offerings, and for whole burnt offerings, a portion of each day. And for the doers and for all the work of the house, they shall bring after the festival of new oil. You're going to bring it after the festival of new oil. Let them bring wood 2 by 2 in their tribes. Those who bring offerings on the first day is Levi and Judah. On the second day, Benjamin and Joseph. On the third day, Reuben and Simeon. On the fourth day, Issachar and Zebulun. On the fifth day, Gad and Asher. And on the sixth day, Dan and Naphtali. So let's say that I'm an investigator. And what I'm investigating is this issue of the calendar. I heard that there's some controversy about the calendar. I don't know what's right and what's not right. I'm just investigating. I want to investigate it, just like someone would investigate how did this fire get started. Okay, so I'm trying to find information. I'm trying to find evidence that I can collect and gather. Okay, so that ultimately, after collecting enough information, I can come to a conclusion. So that's basically how I looked at what I did when I read these books. To me, initially, when I'm reading the books, I'm just reading information. And to me, the information is neutral. I haven't decided to believe it, and I haven't decided not to believe it. I'm just collecting information. And if I get enough information that I can draw a conclusion, then I'll draw a conclusion. But first, I got to collect the information. All right, so let me tell you a fact. In Leviticus chapter 23, the chapter ends with telling us about the Feast of Tabernacles. That is a fact. Okay, now I'm going to tell you another fact. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, it continues after telling you about the Feast of Tabernacles, and it tells you about the festival of the new wine, the new oil, and the wood offering. That's a fact. So now I got 2 facts. Now, you and I could come to different conclusions about the 2 facts, but those are 2 facts. Okay? So what conclusions can we initially kind of think about what we may conclude? Well, either one of 2 things happened. Either the Pharisees, who were responsible for making our canon, and I already said I believe in the inspiration of Scripture, okay? Either they removed this part of Leviticus chapter 23, either they removed it from Leviticus, or the people in the Dead Sea Scrolls added it. Those are the 2 possibilities. It got removed by the Pharisees when they made the canon, or the people in the Qumran, they added it. Those are my only 2 choices. But factually, Leviticus 23 ends with the Feast of Tabernacles, and here, as you can see, they add to Leviticus chapter 23 after the Feast of Tabernacles. They talk about the festival of new wine, oil, and the wood offering. So now I got another fact for you. And that is in Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 34, it says that the wood offering was brought year by year at the appointed time, and it's written in the Torah. That's a fact. Okay? And so now, while we're in in the book of Nehemiah, let's go to Nehemiah chapter 13. And we're going to read the last two verses. Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 30 and 31. Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 30 and 31. It says, "Thus cleansed I them from all the strangers, and I appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, every one in his business. And I appointed the priests and the Levites for the wood offering, at the time appointed, for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good." Once again, it says that there was a time for this wood offering. All right, so now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, because they have a ... there, okay? So the days designated to bring the wood offering is the 6th month in days 23 to 28. And as I shared with you, 2 tribes were to bring it on the first day, and then 2 more tribes the next day, etc. So all 12 tribes brought the wood offering. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go to Haggai chapter 1. Haggai chapter 1. And we are going to look at, I'm going to give you some time to find Haggai in chapter 1. Okay, Haggai chapter 1. Found it? It says in verse 8, Haggai chapter 1, verse 8, go up to the mountain. Well, verse 7 says, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, go up to the mountain and bring wood and build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, says the Lord." So he tells them to bring wood. And then it says in verse 14, Haggai chapter 1, verse 14, "And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Jezebel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people. And they came and they did the work in the house of the Lord of hosts." So it says they did it, but earlier in the chapter, what were they supposed to do? They're supposed to bring wood. So now it says they did what they were supposed to do. Now let's look at the last verse. Haggai chapter 1, verse 15. On the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. Why does it mention that date for? Because that is the date in the Dead Sea Scrolls, according to the calendar, that they were supposed to bring the wood offering. They're supposed to bring it on the 6th month, days 23 to 28. It mentions the 24th. And we're told in Nehemiah 10:34 that when they're supposed to bring it is written in the Torah. And so these are examples, and I would have lots of examples for you, of breadcrumbs of the calendar that are left in our scriptures that is there for us to glean and see that this calendar is in the Torah. We went over Exodus chapter 16. It's in the prophets. And if you get the background of understanding everything going on in the Qumran, you got all kinds of breadcrumbs in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Acts, and elsewhere. Okay, but you got to go back and you got to get the basic understanding of what was going on. Otherwise, when you read this, you just read it and you don't make any connection regarding anything. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you something that I had showed you before. So we're going to go to slide here, 271. So this is a fragment in the scrolls that lists the dates of the Sabbath and the festivals for months 2 to 6. And so it begins with month 2. It says, on the 16th day of the second month is a Sabbath. On the 23rd day of the month is a Sabbath. So you remember what I told you? That in the scrolls, the second month of the 23rd day is always a Sabbath. In the narrative of Exodus chapter 16, where the second month of the 23rd day is a Sabbath, it is a Sabbath according to the priestly calendar that I went to heapcow.com and showed you that on the present day, Hillel Babylonian calendar, the second month of the 23rd day is like never a Sabbath. I got to make a statement, and I think I'm going to be able to share this with you in this presentation. But the rabbis made a decree that when the Pharisees, so the Pharisees that we read about in the Bible became Rabbinic Judaism, and Rabbinic Judaism is called Orthodox Judaism, and it's called Judaism for short. So when we're talking about Judaism today, we're really talking about the belief system of the Pharisees. Okay, so the rabbis made a decree that they adjusted the calendar. Remember, I shared with you that they followed the Babylonian calendar, but then they made some distinct changes to it. Well, they made a ruling that when the Orthodox Jews celebrate the festivals, they cannot celebrate the festivals on the same day as the priestly calendar. So they changed the days of how many days are in a month.
Say that again.
The rabbis made a decree, and if I can find the slide, I'll show you the slide. It comes out of Rachel Elior's book. She's the person that studied the Dead Sea Scrolls for 25 years. She wrote the book, The Three Temples. She's like a real scholar on the subject, okay? And so she explained that the rabbis made a ruling that when Judaism celebrates the festivals, that they could never celebrate the festivals on the same day that it's celebrated on the priestly calendar. So they are intentionally being defiant to the authority of the Zadok priests and the calendar. They are saying in no uncertain words, the authority rests with us, and we reject your authority. Okay? So, now, let's give the presentation on the history of the high priesthood of Israel. So, in being in this movement for over 25 years, and being a teacher in the movement for over 25 years, and I've been a believer in Messiah for over 50 years. In all those years in the church system, and I've read tons of books from the church system, and listened to a lot of tapes and a lot of sermons. And in this movement for 25 years, every time we go to a conference or whatnot, you have all kinds of speakers. But in all that, I have never heard anybody give a teaching on the history of the high priesthood of Israel. So before I took my books and was studying about the Dead Sea Scrolls, I myself did not know the history of the high priesthood of Israel. There was this one book that I got by James Vanderkam, and he was somebody that worked on the Dead Sea Scroll Project. And he wrote a book enumerating the high priests after the Babylonian captivity to Caiaphas. That's what the book was about, telling you all the high priests. And that's when I became aware of the high priesthood and its history, etc. And so that helped me to understand the history and the story that I can now explain what I'm explaining to you beginning now. And I've entitled this teaching, Restoring the Zadok Priesthood. So what we're going to do in the teaching is we're going to trace the history of the high priesthood of Israel. And we're going to understand by tracing that who is the authority to be high priest in Israel. All right, so we're going to start with Exodus chapter 28, verse 1, when we're told that the high priests of Israel were to be from Aaron and his sons. So Aaron has 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Now, one of the major principles of Hebraic Bible prophecy, Torah Bible prophecy, is history is prophecy. So I'm now going to read to you a prophecy that it's not till I get toward the end of this presentation that you're going to understand how it is a prophecy, okay? But the prophecy is that Aaron took a wife, Aaron is Levitical, that Aaron took a wife from the tribe of Judah. That's a prophecy. That's a prophecy of the intermarriage between the tribe of Judah and the Levites. So how does that prophecy play out? Well, from the tribe of Judah, ultimately, it comes down to one family by which the Messiah is going to come through, and that's through David's line. But on the Levitical side, through Aaron and his sons, that's all going to come down to one family as well. And that's going to be the Zadok priests. And I don't know if you ever thought about this or you ever heard about this before, but in Yeshua's physical lineage of his earthly parents, Joseph and Mary, on Joseph's side, Yeshua is descended from David. But on his mother's side, he's descended from the Zadok priesthood. So in Yeshua is the coming together of the Davidic line and the Zadok priesthood. Okay? So Numbers chapter 3, verse 4, Nadab and Abihu died because they offered strange fire before the Lord, and they had no children. As a result, the high priesthood office would be from Aaron, but through his 2 sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. So, Nadab and Abihu died, they had no children, and Eleazar and Ithamar ministered in the priest's office in the sight of Aaron their father. Now, Eleazar has a son named Pinhas, or I pronounce it Phineas, and it says in Exodus 6:25, and Eleazar, Aaron's son, took one of the daughters of Putiel to wife, and she bare him Phineas. Now, those of you who study the Torah portions, Phineas did a noble deed before the Lord, and the Lord rewarded him, and he's made 2 promises to him. Numbers chapter 25, verse 10, and verse 13 are the promises. But in Numbers 25:11, it says, Pinhas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, he was zealous for my sake among them. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace. So he was given, first of all, the covenant of peace, and verse 13, he shall have it in his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. So here is where the promise is made that through Pinhas, who is of Eleazar is how we're going to have the everlasting priesthood. But how does that prophecy get fulfilled? Because we're not told in the Torah how the prophecy gets fulfilled. We're only given the prophecy. So we're going to see how the prophecy gets fulfilled. So we take up in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 3, that Eli was the Lord's priest in Shiloh. So the children of Israel went into the promised land, and they set up the tabernacle in Shiloh, or Shiloh, and while it was there, Eli was the Lord's priest at a certain point in time. Now, Eli is of the line of Ithamar, not Eleazar. Eli is of the line of Ithamar. So, I'm not going to make you memorize this, but the way this connection is Eli was the Lord's priest in Shiloh, and he had a grandson named Ahitub. A grandson named Ahitub. Ahitub, the grandson of Eli the priest, had a son named Ahimelech, and a grandson named Abiathar. And Abiathar was, you might say, co-priest in the days of David with Zadok. Okay? So Ahimelech, who is of the line of Eli the priest, who is of the line of Ithamar. Ahimelech was of the line of Ithamar, as it says in 1 Chronicles 24, verse 3. Ahimelech of the sons of Ithamar. So what we're doing is we're tracing what happened to the line of Ithamar through the prophecy that was given to Eli. Now, this connection, these verses and this connection that I gave to you, these last 3 slides, all that I did is I went to the Jewish Encyclopedia on the article of Eli, and it states the connection that Eli has to Ithamar. So Eli, a descendant of Ithamar, was given a prophecy that the God of Israel would cut off his house. That is, cut off the house of Ithamar. So 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 27, there came a man of God unto Eli and said, Wherefore the Lord God of Israel says, Behold, the days come, I will cut off your arm and the arm of your father's house, that there shall not be an old man in your house. So the prophecy is given. Now we have to have the confirmation, a sign that confirms the prophecy. And this will be the sign that your 2 sons in one day will die. So the confirmation came about in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 11. The ark of God was taken, and the 2 sons of Eli were slain. So now we have the prophecy and the confirmation of the prophecy. So now, after the sign is given of the prophecy, after the prophecy is given that the line of Ithamar was going to be cut off, then we have restated the promise of the line of Eleazar through Phinehas. It says, I'm going to raise me up a faithful priest that will do according to that which is in my heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he will walk before my anointed forever. So one line is going to be cut off in the affirmation that he's going to raise up a faithful line, a faithful priest, or a faithful priesthood. All right, so I'm trying my best to go as slow as I can so you can follow me. Because I want you to be able to follow me, because I've been told many times that the information you share is so much, it's like drinking water out of a fire hose. So I'm trying to go slower and repeat myself so you can follow what I'm saying, okay? So we have the 2 lines from Aaron, his sons, Ithamar, Eleazar. From Ithamar, you have Eli the priest, and a prophecy that his house is going to be cut off. And in the line of Eli the priest is Abiathar. And Abiathar was a co-priest with Zadok in the days of David, King David. Now, initially, Abiathar, who was a descendant of Eli the priest, who was of the line of Ithamar, he was with David and he was faithful to David. To show you an example how he was with and faithful to David, it says in 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 21, and Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. So he was looking out for David's best interest. Okay, so now we're going to begin to be told the story regarding how the prophecy that was given to Eli the priest is going to be fulfilled, that his house will be cut off. And this is the setting of 1 Kings chapter 1 and chapter 2. So 1 Kings chapter 1 starts out, now King David was old and stricken in years. And Adonijah, the son of Haggith, one of David's wives, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. So Adonijah was the fourth son of David. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 2. To David were born sons in Hebron. The fourth son was Adonijah, the son of Haggith. So it's this son at David's deathbed is saying, I'm going to be king after David. So when Adonijah makes this proclamation that he's going to be king when his father David dies, Abiathar, the priest, Abiathar, who is a descendant of Eli, who is of the line of Ithamar, participated in proclaiming Adonijah as the next king of Israel. So it says, Abiathar the priest followed Adonijah and helped him. So Abiathar is participating in a rebellion against King David's wishes. However, Nathan the prophet and Zadok the priest did not participate in that rebellion, did not participate in crowning Adonijah as being the next king in Israel after David. So it says in 1 Kings 1:8 that Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet were not with Adonijah. They did not participate in crowning him king. And what Nathan the prophet does is he goes to King David when he's on his deathbed and tells him what's going on. So 1 Kings chapter 1 verse 24, Nathan says, My Lord, O king, is it your wish that Adonijah will be the king after you? Of course, Nathan knew the answer. But King David says, Go fetch for me Bathsheba. So she comes before him. And David says to Bathsheba, I swore to you by the Lord God of Israel, saying, Assuredly, Solomon, your son, will reign after me, and Solomon will sit in my throne. And I am going to make it happen this day. So David said, Fetch for me Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet, and let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint Solomon to be king over Israel. And blow the trumpet and say, God save King Solomon. So they did it. So now, from King David's wishes, Solomon is now declared an anointed king. And word gets back to Adonijah, who declared himself king, that King David, his father, made Solomon king. And so Adonijah, he's afraid because Solomon has now been made king. Of course, David is so popular among the people. So Adonijah goes and he catches hold of the horns of the altar. You know what the meaning was that he went and grabbed a hold of the horns of the altar? He's pleading for mercy. He's pleading for his life. That's what grabbing hold of the horns of the altar means. Spare my life. Show me mercy. And when he does this, Solomon says to him, if he will show himself a worthy man, then not a hair of him will fall to the earth. If he's innocent, nothing to worry about. But if he's wicked, if he's guilty, he will surely die. So Solomon sent and brought him down from the altar, and Solomon said to Adonijah, okay, now you go back to your house. And that's chapter 1 of 1 Kings. Now we're going to start chapter 2. And it says, the days of David drew nigh that he would die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, so ultimately, David dies. 1 Kings 2:10, David died. He was buried in the city of David. And then it says in 1 Kings 2:12 that Solomon sat upon his throne. So now we're going to go back and pick up 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 1, that David was old and stricken in years, and there was an idea that, well, maybe we'll comfort him as he's laying on his deathbed. So they fetched for this beautiful young virgin, and they said, let her lie in your bosom that my lord the king may get heat. So they sought for the fair damsel, and they found her, Abishag, and brought her to the king. And it says she was extremely good looking. However, the king knew her not. Okay, so all that she was able to do was just lay by him. And now what happens is Adonijah, who declared himself king, is going to ask Bathsheba to ask Solomon if Abishag can be his wife. So Bathsheba does this. She goes to Solomon and asks on behalf of Adonijah if Abishag can be Adonijah's wife. Well, Solomon smells the seed of a rebellion against him. So he says, we ain't letting this happen. And so he says, Adonijah shall be put to death this way. So King Solomon sent for his servant and caused Adonijah to die. Because not only had he rebelled against his father David, but now he's plotting to rebel against Solomon. And Solomon says, this is not going to stand. Okay. So that is what happened to Adonijah. Well, what happened to the priest Abiathar? The priest Abiathar, who was co-priest with Zadok the priest at the end of David's life, what's going to happen to him? Because he participated in the declaration of Adonijah being king. He participated in the rebellion. So Solomon says to Abiathar. Now remember, Abiathar is of the line of Eli the priest, who was of the line of Ithamar. And so Abiathar, Solomon said to Abiathar, you are worthy of death, but you are not going to be put to death. I'm going to show you mercy because you bore the ark of the Lord God before David my father. And now, this is all the background to tell you the story behind how the prophecy that was given to Eli gets fulfilled. The declaration of the fulfillment of the prophecy is 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 27. So Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest unto the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord, which he spake concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. So from this point in time, there is to be no more high priests in Israel from the line of Ithamar. So Aaron has 4 sons, Nadab and Abihu. They offered strange fire. No one from that line got to be high priest. And with this declaration to Abiathar, the prophecy is his house is going to be cut off. No more high priests in Israel from the line of Ithamar. The only valid high priests in Israel are of the line of Eleazar, through Phinehas, through Zadok, the priest. So it says in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 22, they made Solomon, the son of David, king the second time, and he made Zadok to be the priest. So, from here until 2nd century BC, until approximately around 175 BC. And from now until the days of the coming of Antiochus Epiphanes IV, all the high priests in Israel are from the Zadok line. They're all sons of Zadok. So this is where we have the origin of the Tabernacle of David. So the Tabernacle of David has many applications, okay? I'm only sharing one. And that is Zadok is the priest. As we get to the end of David's life in the beginning of Solomon's reign. So we're told in Acts chapter 15, verse 16, that the Tabernacle of David had fallen, and we are living in the days of Elijah, the days of restoration, are the days of restoration. And part of is to restore the fallen Tabernacle of David. And this is one element, it's not the only element, but it's one element of the fallen Tabernacle of David. Is that how it was at the beginning of Solomon's reign, that Zadok is the priest? That fell. There came a point in time when the Zadoks weren't the high priests in Israel. From the Greek Seleucid influence, they got removed from their high priesthood office. And I'm going to get to it, but when that happened, it says explicitly in the Dead Sea Scrolls how they responded. And they responded by going to the Qumran and establishing the community there. And it says explicitly in the scrolls, they went there based upon Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. That is, a voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. So I'm going to show you from the Damascus document where they quote that verse saying that that's how we saw the solution to our situation. All right? So Zadok is the priest right here. What I'm going to do now. Yeah.
Where's the Tabernacle of David described?
Amos chapter 9, verse 11, and Acts chapter 15, verse 16. Okay? So, in the prophecy that is quoted in Acts 15, verse 16, is Amos chapter 9, verse 11. It says, in that day will I raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen, and I will close up the breaches thereof. I will raise up its ruins, and I will build it as the days of old. So that's the prophecy of restoring the tabernacle of David. Okay? So now we're sitting right here in the days of David, Solomon, and Zadok is the priest. Okay? So now we're going to go to, I think it's 1 Chronicles in chapter 28. Let's see if that's right or not. Let's see if that's right. Yep. 1 Chronicles chapter 28. And we're going to read beginning in verse 11. So for those of you who want to find it, I'll give you an opportunity to turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 28, beginning in verse 11. Does anyone need more time?
Sorry, you say
First Chronicles, chapter 28, beginning in verse 11. Okay? Are you there? Okay, it says, Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, the houses thereof, the treasures. In other words, the pattern to build the first temple. In the upper chambers, in the inner parlors, in the place of the mercy seat. David's given this to Solomon. And he's giving him the pattern of all that he had. Look, the pattern by the Holy Spirit, by the Spirit. Okay? He gave him the pattern to build the first temple by the Spirit in the courts of the house of the Lord, in all the chambers, and of the treasuries of the house, and the treasury of dedicated things, and for the courses of the priests and the Levites, for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, for all the vessels of service of the house of the Lord. So the priestly and the Levitical services are given from David to Solomon by the Holy Spirit, and in order for the priests and the Levites to know what to do, Solomon had to tell them what he got from his father. Okay? So, who first is Solomon going to tell about how you do the work of the service in the temple? Who's he going to first explain this to? Zadok the priest. So this pattern was given to Zadok the priest. All right, I'm going to round off here. I'm not going to be exact. So basically, the time of King David and Solomon was about 1000 BC, 950 BC, somewhere in that neighborhood. Okay? So when do they go to Babylon? Well, the final taking is in 586 BC. 6, 7, 8. So you got what? You got basically, rounding off, you got 350 to 400 years before they went to Babylon. Zadok is the priest. So what's the probability that Zadok the priest, under Solomon, that was given these services of the temple, what's the probability that he's following the Babylonian calendar?
Not very good.
I would say probably 0. So it's really not complicated, but you know what you got to do to understand it? You got to go back to the beginning. And so, you know what we try to study in this movement? We try to study the second temple. Why don't we go back to the beginning? Why don't we study the first temple? And why don't we actually go back and study the tabernacle? There's 15 chapters in the Torah about the tabernacle. Why don't we study that? Why don't we study the first temple? And why don't we connect with the tabernacle and the first temple? Why do we think it's only about the second temple? We're not going back to the beginning. So that's why we don't have the understanding that we should have, because this is an example of what I meant when I said yesterday, or earlier today, actually, the first session, when I said in this movement going back to the beginning, which it hasn't gone back to the beginning. So we haven't gone back to study and understand and take things from the days of David and Solomon and see how the tabernacle of David had followed. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the calendar is completely aligned with the priestly courses that are given here. That was given from David to Solomon. So the priestly courses is outlined in 1 Chronicles chapter 24. There's 24 priestly courses. So these 24 priestly courses is aligned with the calendar. So in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it says what course is serving the first week of the year, what course the second week of the year, what the third week of the year. And then actually the calendar is outlined over a 6-year period. So you need to know whether you're in year 1 of the calendar, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And what it pertains to is so you know which course of priests are to serve that week in the temple. Because there's 52 weeks in the year, but there's only 24 courses. So you have 24 times 2, so each course can serve twice in the year. And then we start, some courses, priests are going to be able to serve 3 times in a year. But if we continue sequentially, then who is serving in the first week of the year when we start year 1 is not the same priestly course that's serving in year 2. And so it's not just the calendar is married to these priestly courses. And so when I get a chance to find the slide, I'll show you in the scrolls how that is laid out. All right? So now we have Zadok as the priest. So for those of you who like a visual, this is what I've covered so far. Aaron has 4 sons, Nadab and Abihu offer strange fire, so we don't have no high priest coming from them. And then we have in the line of Ithamar, through the prophecy that was given to Eli, and then ultimately, based upon what Abiathar did, no more high priests come from that line. So the only valid line of high priests is from Aaron to Eleazar to Phinehas to Zadok. And then the Zadok priests are given the blessing regarding service in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. All right, so now I'm going to read to you from the Jewish Encyclopedia under the article of Zadok. And basically the first part says that Zadok was faithful to David. But I'm going to read to you this sentence from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Reliable historical data shows that the high priesthood remained in the hands of the Zadokites from this time, that is, from the time of Zadok the priest at the beginning of the reign of Solomon, until the rise of the Maccabees. So when we get the Maccabees, we don't have the Zadok priest serving as high priest. So if you want to know scripturally the high priestly line of Aaron through his son Eleazar, it's 1 Chronicles chapter 6, beginning in verse 3. So in the line of Eleazar, Eleazar begat Pinhas. Then ultimately in 1 Chronicles 6:8, we have Zadok 1. But then in 1 Chronicles 6:12, we have Zadok 2. And then it ends with Jehozadak, who's a Zadok priest. And Jehozadak, the Zadok priest, goes into Babylonian captivity. It says Jehozadak, Zadok went into captivity when the Lord carried away Judah and Jerusalem by the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So for those of you who like a listing, here's the listing from Aaron, Eleazar, Pinhas. First Zadok is number 12. Then number 19 is second Zadok. And look, interestingly enough, according to this list, from Aaron being number 1 to Jehozadak that goes into Babylonian captivity, there's 24 in the line. So the Zadok priest Jehozadak goes into Babylonian captivity. And the Zadok priest Joshua, sometimes called Jeshua, he returns from Babylonian captivity. And in the return from Babylonian captivity, the rebuilding of the first temple begins. So the return of the exiles from Babylonian captivity are listed in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And the Zadok priests from the return of the Babylonian captivity, through the Persian period, because the Persians came and defeated the Babylonians. So during the Persian period, Nehemiah chapter 12 gives you the list of high priests who were Zadok priests during the Persian period. So it begins with Jeshua, sometimes it's written as Joshua, And the last one is Jaddua, Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 11. All right? So, according to the historian Josephus, the Zadok priest Jaddua is a contemporary of Alexander the Great. So let's go back in Nehemiah chapter 12. These are the list of high priests in the Persian era. And the last one, Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 11, the last one is Jaddua. According to Josephus, Jaddua was a contemporary of Alexander the Great. So from the Persians, we now go into the Greek period. Alexander the Great defeated the Persians. So if you go back and count in Nehemiah chapter 12, there are 6 Zadok priests in the Persian era. And in the return from Babylonian captivity, the Zadok priest Joshua, who is the first one listed here, it's written Jeshua. So he is a contemporary with Zerubbabel. And Zerubbabel is from the house of David. So the 2 leaders from Babylonian captivity, Zerubbabel from the house of David, and the Zadok priest. So the books of Haggai and the books of Zechariah tells us more details about the roles of Joshua, the Zadok priest, and Zerubbabel from the house of David. Now I'm going to share with you a viewpoint of Zechariah chapter 4 that comes from this book by James Vanderkam, where this book is all about detailing the high priest from Joshua or Jeshua to Caiaphas. And he's going to give a perspective, an interpretation of Zechariah 4 that I've never seen before, never heard before, never considered. So the only way that I've ever saw Zechariah chapter 4 is it prophesies of the 2 witnesses of Revelation chapter 11. That's the only way I've ever seen it. Okay? But here he gives a different viewpoint. He says, Zechariah 4, where we have the vision of the menorah, the lampstand. The central image of the vision is the lampstand, and there's 2 olive trees that supply oil to it. Zechariah chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. Now, these 2 anointed ones, which literally in Hebrew says sons of oil, they stand before the Lord of the whole earth. Like I said, Revelation 11, the 2 witnesses, refers to this, okay? But, there's more than one understanding and application of the scriptural text. So here's what James Vanderkam says about Zechariah 4. He says, these 2 sons of oil, they're symbolic or they're representative of the restored priesthood of Zadok in the house of David. I thought, wow.
That's right, you're saying in verse 2, it is saying the sons of Aaron?
Let's see. I'd have to look, but it's the verse that says the 2 anointed ones that stands before the Lord of the whole earth. Oh, this says, I think Zechariah 4:14. Is that right? 4:14.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, okay, Shania 9,
Okay. So he gives the interpretation that these 2 are symbolic of the restored priesthood of Zadok in the house of David. I never viewed it. I never looked at it that way. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So now we're being given enough information that we can go back to the slide that we started in the presentation where Aaron took a wife from the tribe of Judah, and now we can see how this is being prophetic. That the tribe of Judah, through the line of David, is going to come together with the Levitical tribe through Aaron and through Eleazar, and ultimate to the family of the Zadok line. So now Messiah is linked with these two chosen families. That is the house of David and the Zadok priest. In Zechariah chapter 6, verses 11 and 12, the prophecy is, make crowns and set them on the head of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Now, he is a Zadok priest. So the prophecy is to put a crown on the Zadok priest. And in this symbolic act, it says, speak to him. Thus speaks the Lord of hosts, behold the man whose name is the branch. He will grow up and he will build the temple of the Lord. This is a reference to the Messiah. So the prophecy about the Messiah and the Messiah building the temple is associated with a prophecy that was given to Zadok the priest when he was told to put a crown on his head. Now we're going to look at Jeremiah chapter 33, verse 15 and verse 17. It says, in those days and at that time, I will cause the branch of righteousness to grow up unto David. He will execute judgment and righteousness in the land. That's a prophecy about the Messiah. Then it says, for thus says the Lord, David will never want a man to sit upon the throne of the house of Israel. So Messiah is going to come from the line of David. Then it goes on to say, in the next verse, neither shall the priests, the Levites, want a man before me to offer burnt offerings. So this phrase, the priests, the Levites that are offering burnt offerings, this is a duty that was given to 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 49. But Aaron and his sons offered upon the altar of the burnt offering. So this phrase, neither shall the priests, the Levites, this phrase is in Ezekiel 49, verse 19, but it's given in more detail. And you shall give the priests, the Levites, that be of the seed of Zadok, which approach to me to minister unto me, says the Lord God. So, the house of David and the Zadok priests are the two chosen families of the God of Israel. So it says in Jeremiah 33, verse 22, as the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David, my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me. And so the Levites is expressed through the priesthood in the Zadok line. So it says, consider you not what this people have spoken, saying, the two families which the Lord has chosen. So from Romans chapter 1, verse 3, Messiah is born from the line of David. And now we're going to show the connection of Yeshua's earthly father and mother and the connection to the Zadok priesthood. So in Luke chapter 1, verse 34 and 35, it says, then said Mary unto the angel, how shall these things be, seeing I know not a man? And the angel answered and said, your cousin Elizabeth, she has also conceived a son in her old age. So Mary and Elizabeth are cousins. And Elizabeth is the wife of Zacharias, and they had a son named John the Baptist, and Zacharias is a priest. So Yeshua is related to the priesthood. He's related to the Zadok line on his mother's side. However, Yeshua is not a Zadok priest. Zadok priests are the priests that are on earth. Yeshua is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And the Melchizedek priesthood is the eternal heavenly priesthood. So Yeshua is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek is anglicized of two Hebrew words. The first word is Melech, which means king. And the second word is Zadok, which means righteousness. So Melchizedek means king of righteousness. But you know, in a Torah scroll, in the Hebrew scriptures, as the scrolls originally were, there's no vowels. So, I can take the letters from which I get Zadok, and I can change the vowels. Instead of saying Zadok, I can say Zadok. Same letters. So I could read Melchizedek as meaning king of the Zadok priests. So Yeshua being after the order of Melchizedek, his Melchizedek priestly order, he's over the Zadok priest. He's king of the Zadok priest, and the Zadok priest is an earthly priesthood. So now, after the Persian era, beginning with Alexander the Great, we have the Grecian era. So the Grecian era runs from roughly 323 BC to 164 BC. And Josephus, the historian Josephus, is our primary historical source for the Grecian era. And Josephus is our primary source regarding who were the high priests during the Grecian era. And so here's a list of names. So it begins with Onias the first, and it goes down to Onias the third. And it was from Onias the third and going forward is where we have the beginning of the corruption of the high priesthood. Now, Onias is a Greek name. How you would render Onias in Hebrew is Yoni, or the longer form is Yochanan, or we would say John. So I have a question for you, and this is also something that I've never heard anybody give an explanation in 50 years of being in the faith, 25 years of being in this movement. I've never heard anybody give a message or a sermon explaining why the angel of the Lord told Zacharias that his son had to be named John. Why is there divine intervention? It says, okay, no, it has to be John. Why? Well, it was to show the continuity through name of the legitimate Zadok line, because the last legitimate Zadok priest was Onias III, John, and to show the continuity of the line, it was by name, so he has to be, John the Baptist has to be named the same name as the last legitimate faithful Zadok priest, Onias III. All right, so why is it that Yeshua said to John the Baptist, no, I have to be immersed of you to fulfill all righteousness? Why didn't he go to the temple? Why does he have to be immersed of John? Because he's recognized John as the legitimate high priest. Why is it in the book of John, chapter 1, why are we given an account where we're told that John the Baptist looked at Yeshua and said, "You're the Lamb of God"? Why are we told that for? Because it was the legitimate high priest that had to say that the sacrifice was according to the Torah. So we're being told that he is the legitimate line. John the Baptist is the legitimate line of priests. Okay? And John the Baptist grew up in the Qumran, where the Zadok priests were, where the people there were under the authority of the Zadok priests. Now, I don't have time to go over what I'm about to tell you now, because, I'll need another 5 more hours to go through and explain it in detail. But to make it simple so that you can understand it, the Qumran community, they were the Jewish Pentecostals. And the Pharisees were the Jewish Baptists. I'm being serious. I mean, not in the literal name, but in... And so everything that Yeshua does, he heals the blind, the deaf, the lame, the dumb, the lepers. He's doing all these Pentecostal things. And he says, now you wait for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. And, you know, all these Pentecostal things. Well, the Baptists weren't too impressed. They weren't too impressed with all the Pentecostal things. They goes, we don't care that you raised the dead, you know, the leper, the blind, etc. We don't care. That's all been done away with. And so, you know, that doesn't make you the Messiah. We're not impressed. So, well, I'm going to get to where it's going to state in the scrolls that the Qumran community was founded based upon Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. A voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Okay, so now in John chapter 1, they asked John, who are you? And you know what his answer was? They asked him, who are you, in John chapter 1, verse 19. And he gave the answer in John chapter 1, verse 23. I am Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. I'm the voice of one crying in the wilderness. When he said that he was Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, he was directly connecting himself to the Qumran. Because the Qumran was founded upon that verse. Okay, so since I'm talking about Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, I'd like for you to go to it, because I'm not sure that it's...
Wait.
Yeah.
You said this voice of one crying is directly connected to the Qumran in the desert?
Correct. Because, I haven't showed you yet, but in the Damascus document, okay, it says that their community was founded upon that verse. Okay? And that verse says, prepare the way of the Lord. So they were known as the people of the way. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they called themselves the way. So what were the first Jewish believers called in the book of Acts? Why were they called the way? Because they were the people connected and associated with the Qumran, with Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. So I want you to go to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, and I'm particularly interested in the people who have, going to look this up on their phones, in the Bible app, where you can look at the Hebrew from the Strong's number in Isaiah in chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40. So I'm going to wait for those who want to turn and find it. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. And for those of you who have a Bible program, you got the interlinear, okay? So, has everyone found it on their Bible program? And on the Bible program, can you click on where it says bring up the Strong's numbers? Okay, so in Isaiah 40, verse 3, it says, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. The word desert is the Strong's number what? It's the Strong's number 6160. It's the Hebrew word Aravah. Now the Aravah is a geographical location in Israel. It is the Rift Valley that goes roughly from the Dead Sea down to the Red Sea, and it goes and extends into Africa. This verse literally says, go to the Aravah and prepare yourself for the coming of the Messiah. This verse is talking about preparing for the coming of the Messiah. So they literally went to the Aravah, which is where the Qumran is, and they set themselves to prepare themselves for the coming of the Messiah. And so they went to the Arava. All right? Were you able to follow me there? The Strong's number 6160, for those who've got the program. You see that? It's Arava. Are you able to follow me?
Yes.
All right? So now we're going to go to Isaiah chapter 35. Isaiah chapter 35. So they went to the Arava. And they built their community. All right. Has everyone found Isaiah chapter 35? Verse 1, and I want the people that's got the Bible app, that's got the Strong's numbers, okay? Verse 1, the wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as a rose. That word desert?
Arava.
6160, it's Arava. So this is a prophecy that the Arava will blossom. Who is in the Arava? The Qumran community from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. This is a prophecy that the Qumran is going to blossom. Okay, and it says, it shall blossom. It's first of all, verse 1 says, it will rejoice and blossom as a rose, and then it says, it will blossom abundantly. That's actually the Hebrew that repeats the word blossom. So it mentions the word blossom 3 times. And it says, it will rejoice, even with joy and singing. That's the second time it says rejoice. It says the glory of Lebanon will be given unto it. Now that's the biblical way of saying it. It's going to get the highest praise. Okay? The Arava, the Qumran, is going to get the highest praise. And the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. And they will see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. And then it says, so you see, because when I read, I do a couple things when I read my Bible. I look for definitions, and I look for associations, and I keep track when I'm reading what is the subject. So, based upon verse 1, what is the subject? The Arava. This is a prophecy about the Arava, right? That's the subject. So given that that's a subject, it says in verse 5, it says, the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Regarding what? What's the subject? The Arava. The eyes of the blind will be opened and the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. Regarding the Arava, regarding the Qumran. It's a prophecy that the message of the Qumran and who the people were and what they represent and how they're connected to the Jewish roots of our faith and how they were faithful priests from the days of David, and they were faithful to keep the priestly calendar. It's a prophecy that people that previously didn't understand it, they're going to understand it. The eyes of the blind will be opened. And previously, like, I don't know anything about that. I don't want to hear none of that. The ears of the deaf will go unstopped. The lame man shall leap as a hart, and the tongue of the mute shall sing. And now the subject is the Arava, right? So verse 7, and the parched ground shall become a pool. In other words, it was a parched ground. Those scrolls were in there for 2,000 years until somebody threw a stone and we found them. And it's like, well, what does that mean? What does that have to do with us? It's just, these clays and these things. And now it took from the 1940s to the 1990s for the academics to even begin the process to make the information available. And so it starts out as parched ground, and it will become a pool. So it's starting to come alive now. It's starting to get a little bit of water. It will become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. And it says in verse 8, and a highway will be there. A highway will be where? From the Arava. A highway will be there. And that highway will be called the way of holiness. So what was the Qumran community in principle meticulous about? Holiness. They were meticulous about being clean and unclean. They took seriously the God of Israel, I believe it's in Deuteronomy, said, when I walk through the camp, make sure there's no uncleanness in the camp. They took it seriously. So that's why they had mikvah baths all the time, so they wanted to make sure that they were ceremonial clean. You know why? Because they wanted the Lord to come to their camp. And they wanted to make sure that they were clean before Him. And they also prayed and desired and they welcomed angels being in their midst. And they didn't want the angels to go away because of uncleanness. So it's the way of holiness. It says the unclean will not pass over. Now, the prophecy about the Arava coming to life and blossoming as a rose, and it going from a dry land to springs of water, it's associated with the greater Exodus. Because in verse 10 it says, and the ransom of the Lord will return and come to Zion with songs and everlasting joy upon their head. They will obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. That's the prophecy of the end of the exile. That's the prophecy of the greater Exodus. So this prophecy links the Qumran coming to life with the greater Exodus, with the end of the exile. So why are you hearing about it now? Why didn't you hear about it 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Because we're close to the end of the exile, and you know what you had to be taught first? You had to be taught that you're Israel, and the two sticks are going to become one, and Messiah's coming to end the exile. You had to be taught that and know and understand that so that you can make connection to this, because the two are linked. So the two are linked together. So now, since John the Baptist said that he's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, it was prophesied of him in Luke chapter 1, verse 17. So let's go to Luke chapter 1, verse 17. Luke chapter 1 and verse 17. So tell me when you found it. Everyone good? Yes. So this is a prophecy about John. It says, he shall go before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah. Look what he's going to do. His ministry is to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. You know what that is? That's Malachi chapter 4. Malachi chapter 4 and verse 5. Okay? And then it says, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. To make ready a people prepared for the Lord. That's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. So, Malachi 4 to 6 is about the ministry of Elijah to bring restoration. Remember the Torah of Moses. But the ministry of Elijah to bring restoration is linked with Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3 is a part of the restoration. And so a highway will be there, right? So you know where the highway from the Qumran goes? It goes to Jerusalem. So you know what that means? You can't get to Jerusalem unless you go through the Arava. The road to Jerusalem goes through the Arava. And what is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is the roots of our faith. You cannot get to the Jewish roots of your faith unless you go through the Arava, unless you go through the Qumran. The Qumran is the Jewish roots of your faith. If you're following and understanding what I'm saying, are you following and understanding what I'm saying?
Picking up what you put down.
So, you know what's sad? People in this movement are rejecting the Jewish roots of their faith. And this is supposed to be a Hebrew roots movement.
Not everybody is,
And they're rejecting their very roots. But time's not up. We can change it. We can understand, and we can change where we're walking and where we're going tomorrow. I mean, time didn't end today.
Well, maybe not to reject, you just haven't faced this yet, or haven't been presented.
I'm talking about those who made a decision.
Yeah,
I would say 99% of the people here haven't made a decision. You're in the process of learning. You haven't made a decision. I'm talking about those who's made a decision. And if I want to be more direct, you know who I'm talking about, those who have made a decision? Leaders.
Yeah.
Certainly,
You gotta get it out to the people.
certain leaders have made a decision. When I'm saying they're rejecting, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about leaders
Yeah.
have rejected.
Yeah.
Okay, so that causes me to think of talking about the sin of Jeroboam. You ever heard about the sin of Jeroboam?
Yes.
Okay, now let me explain to you the sin of Jeroboam. So we're going to go to, I believe, it's 1 Kings and chapter 12. Okay? So tell me when you found it. 1 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to begin in verse 26. First Kings chapter 12, verse 26. Are you ready? And Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David. If this people go to do the sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. What's the house of the Lord at Jerusalem? It's the temple. So what he's saying is if we go to Jerusalem, and when they're going to do the sacrifice in the house of the Lord, when are they offering these sacrifices? Well, part of the time when they offer the sacrifices is during the festival season, because during the festivals there's certain sacrifices that have to be offered, okay? So here's what he says. If I go to Jerusalem and keep the festivals in Jerusalem, now, at the time of Jeroboam, who's the high priest in Jerusalem? Zadok. The Zadok priests. And how are the Zadok priests keeping the festivals?
Yeah.
According to the priestly calendar. So Jeroboam says, if I go to Jerusalem and I submit myself to the authority of the Zadok priests, who are keeping the festivals according to the priestly calendar, it will cause division. So therefore, I cannot keep the festivals according to the Zadok priests because it will create division and it won't be good for me. In other words, it's not good for my ministry. That's what Jeroboam said. He was king. It's not good for my kingship. I can say he's not good for my ministry. And so he refused to go to Jerusalem and to keep the festivals and to be under the authority of the Zadok priests. So therefore the king took counsel. He had a church meeting. And he gathers together, everybody that's on the board. And they ask the board, now what do you think about if we start keeping the Zadok calendar stuff? Oh, that won't be good. There's a lot of division, it'll create confusion in our congregation and all this division and everything, and it's not good for our ministry. Let's just distance ourselves from it. Let's not have anything to do with it. And so the king took counsel. And he says, well, I can't go up to Jerusalem. Behold your gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. He's referring to the sin of the golden calf. Do you know what the sin of the golden calf was? Mixture. Because you know who they said the calf was?
Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh.
They said the calf was Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So they were worshiping Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh according to mixture. That was the golden calf. So Jeroboam says, I can't go to Jerusalem to keep the festivals according to the authority of the Zadok priests. I have to keep doing the festivals according to mixture, i.e. according to the Babylonian calendar. And so he says that he made, verse 31, he made a house of the high places, and he made priests of the lowest of people that were not of the sons of Levi. You might say that weren't Zadok priests. And so basically, the decisions that was made, that's what the priests did, were made by those that weren't Zadok priests. So actually the sin of Jeroboam is the refusal to keep the festivals under the authority of the Zadok priests and to do it some other way. So, you know what the enemy does? He twists it. So, when we don't go back to the beginning, you know what the enemy does? He replaces the beginning. And he calls the replaced beginning the beginning. So, you know what he's calling the beginning? What we're doing now. The beginning is what we're doing now. We're following the festivals according to a Babylonian calendar. So we're called, that's the beginning. If you don't do it this way, then you're committing the sin of Jeroboam and you're being rebellious and you're not under authority. And who are you to decide to do things on your own? You can't. You got to be under authority. And you got to be under the authority of this system that we're calling the original, but it's not the original. Because we haven't gone back to the beginning. That's what the enemy does. So, he tries to make us feel guilty. You know how he makes the church feel guilty? Now, you can't do the law because you know Yeshua is the Messiah, don't you? I mean, he died for your sins. And you're saved by grace through faith. And I want you can't escape Messiah. It's Messiah, Messiah, Messiah. And if you're going to follow the Messiah, you can't follow the Torah. It's Messiah. So he uses the guilt of you need to follow Messiah in order to get you to not follow the Torah. So now over here he uses the guilt of, you're departing from the Babylonian calendar and the authority of the Pharisees to establish the Babylonian calendar, and that means that you're not following Torah. Now, you know you're supposed to follow the Torah, don't you? You guys, we're here to follow the Torah. And don't you know you're supposed to follow the Torah? And you know if you don't follow the Torah, you sin. And you better be following the Torah. And so if you really want to follow the Torah, you better follow the Babylonian calendar, because we're supposed to follow the Torah. So he uses the same guilt trip on the other side. Okay? So now we're going to go back and we're going to pick up the presentation. And here from this book, Between the Testaments, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Qumran, it says, Antiochus Epiphanes IV put the Jerusalem high priest position up to the highest bidder. And the high priest Jason and Menelaus both achieved their position through bribes to the Seleucid king. So these were two high priests that came after Onias III. This is where the priesthood started to be corrupted. So this is from Rachel Elior's book, The Three Temples. She writes, in summary, historical evidence places the fall of the Zadok priest in the reign of Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Subsequently, the high priesthood was taken over by the Hasmoneans. In other words, the Hasmoneans having the high priesthood was a corollary of it, because we don't have the Zadok priest in control. So Jonathan, the first Maccabean priest, was appointed by the Greeks. This is from James Vanderkam's book. He worked on the Dead Sea Scrolls. The book is the Dead Sea Scrolls today. He says, the kings of the Seleucid Empire appointed several high priests for what appears to be a largely political and financial reasons. Josephus, who with the authors of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, is one of the few sources of information for the period in question. And he maintains that there was no high priest in Jerusalem between 159 and 152 BC. In 152 BC, Jonathan, one of the Hasmonean brothers, was appointed high priest by another Seleucid king, Alexander Dalus, who succeeded Antiochus Epiphanes IV, because he needed Jonathan's military backing. And this way, the Maccabean or high priesthood began. So we have the story of Hanukkah, where they stood up against the Greeks, but then later, after they stood up against the Greeks, they make an agreement with the Greeks. Can we have the high priesthood? We'll give you money, and you recognize us. Okay, we'll kick out the Zadok priests. They don't have an army. So Jonathan was the first Maccabean priest. He served 152 to 142 BC. And in 1 Maccabees chapter 7, we're told that the Seleucid king appoints Jonathan high priest. So the Hasmonean Maccabean high priests were from 152 BC to 37 BC. So Jonathan's appointment by the Seleucid Greeks ended the Zadok priesthood in the temple. So now this is where the Tabernacle of David has fallen. The Zadok priests are no longer the priests. So when the Greeks politically controlled the temple, the Zadok priests fled to the Qumran. The Zadok priest has been in office since the days of David. So, now, when the Greeks came in and controlled the temple, what calendar do you think they followed? The Greek calendar, which was based upon the what? The Babylonian calendar. So this is where Antiochus Epiphanes begins the process to change times and seasons. So now, from James Vanderkam's book, he says, the Damascus document furnishes information about how the Qumran community began. So now I'm going to be reading to you from one of the fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they're going to tell you how and at what time their community began. It says, in the era of wrath, 390 years at the time he handed them over to the power of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So the final captivity by Nebuchadnezzar was 586 BC. Now I add 390 years to that. From Aaron, a ruler planning to inherit the land, they groped like blind men, trying to find their way for 20 years. Then he raised up a teacher of righteousness to guide them. So if we do the math that's here, from 586, we'll call it 587 BC, add 390 years, you get to 197 BC, and then they tried to find their way for 20 years. That brings you to 177 BC. Okay? So now, Rachel Elior says in her book, The Three Temples, it is quite clear from the Qumran literature at our disposal that the leadership of the community consisted of priests who traced their lineage to the house of Zadok and therefore to the high priesthood. So now I'm going to read to you from the scrolls where they themselves refer to the prophecy of Ezekiel 44 verse 15 saying, that's about us. It says, so he built for them a faithful house in Israel. I'm reading from the scrolls. God promised them by Ezekiel the prophet, saying, the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, who have kept the course of my sanctuary when the children of Israel strayed from me, they shall bring the fat and the blood. So they're saying that prophecy is written about us. So here's some examples where it's explicitly stated that the Qumran community was led by Zadok priests. Whoever approaches the council of the community shall enter the covenant of God in the presence of all who has freely pledged themselves. He shall undertake by a binding oath to return with all of his heart and all of his soul to every commandment of the Torah in accordance to all that's been revealed to us, to the sons of Zadok, the priests, the keepers of the covenant and the seekers of his will. Another example from the Damascus document. The sons of Levi shall hold office, each in his place, under the authority of the sons of Aaron, under the authority of the sons of Zadok the priest. So now here from the scrolls, there's prayers for blessing for the Zadok priests. A word of blessing belonging to the instructor by which to bless the sons of Zadok, the priest, chosen by God to uphold his covenant forever. So Rachel Elior says that because it's explicitly stated in the scrolls, multiple places, I shared with you a couple, that the Zadok priests were the leaders of the community, she says that the leadership of the Zadok priests in the Qumran is undeniable because of because it is explicitly said. So an enemy of the leader of the community, called the teacher of righteousness, was the wicked priest. The wicked priest appears 7 times in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Qumran community was established based upon Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, to prepare to look for the coming of the Messiah. And so it was from that community that the Zadok priests were the priests that believed in Yeshua in Acts chapter 6, verse 7. And I'm going to go over this later tonight in the next session. I'm going to go over Acts chapter 2 and show you that the 3,000 Jews that were saved, characteristically, as we're told about things in Acts chapter 2, characteristically they're associated and linked and tied with the Qumran. So when the Messiah came, they believed in him. They accepted him. And when they believed on him, they were given 2 additional names in the book of Acts. The Way and the Nazarenes. The Way and the Nazarenes. Acts chapter 6, verse 7 says, the word of God increased, and a great company of the priests were obedient to the faith. These were Zadok priests. So the God of Israel has chosen and appointed the sons of Zadok to be his priests. So it says in Ezekiel 44:15, the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, they will come near to me to minister to me. Ezekiel 48:11, it shall be for the priests that are sanctified, those that are sanctified of the sons of Zadok, which have kept my charge. So now all this background is to highlight something that I believe I shared in the last session. If you can now see the history of the high priesthood and who has the authority and the office of the high priesthood, it gets down from Aaron's 4 sons to Eleazar to Phinehas to Zadok, and the sons of Zadok were faithful. It says in Ezekiel 44:24 that in controversy, referring back to Deuteronomy 17, verse 8, they, the sons of Zadok, will stand in judgment. In other words, the Zadok priests of the Qumran community will stand in judgment, and they will keep my Torah, and they will keep my festivals. So the Lord has acknowledged the Zadok priest as being his authority in controversy about when and how to keep the festivals. The God of Israel here recognizes the Zadok priest to determine the ruling regarding how we're supposed to keep the festival according to the priestly calendar. I want to emphasize again, even though it's called Zadok calendar, the Zadok priests, did not make the calendar. It existed before them. They're the ones that followed it and were faithful to keep it and preserve it. So where it says in controversy, Ezekiel 44:24, it's referring back to Deuteronomy 17, verse 8. That if there arrives a matter too hard for you in judgment, being matters of controversy within your gates. So what are you supposed to do? You shall go to the priests, the Levites, and to the judge that will be in those days. Today, Orthodox Judaism claims these verses as their Torah authority to make halakhic rulings that the Jewish people are to therefore follow. The rulings by the rabbis, the rulings of their judicial court, which was the Sanhedrin. So the Zadok priests, they had a judicial system, but it wasn't the judicial system of the Pharisees. The judicial system of the Pharisees was the Sanhedrin. So now, I showed you one place where Deuteronomy 17 verse 8 is interpreted in the Hebrew Scriptures, and that is Ezekiel 44:24. Ezekiel 44:24 gives an interpretation of Deuteronomy 17, 8 and 9. The second place where we have the interpretation of Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 8 and 9, is in 2 Chronicles chapter 19, verse 8. It says, moreover, in Jerusalem did Jehoshaphat set the Levites and the priests for controversies. So, did Jehoshaphat set up the Pharisees? Did he set up the rabbis?
No.
Who did he set up? Exactly what Deuteronomy 17, 8, and 9 says. The Levites, the priests. Okay? So, I'm trying to amplify for you by telling you the history of the high priesthood of Israel. That the Zadok priests have the authority of the high priesthood office in order to make rulings of the Torah and specifically to guide us when and how we're supposed to keep the festivals. So I entitled this message, Restoring the Zadok Priesthood. So how do we restore the Zadok priesthood? Very easily. By recognizing their authority. The moment you recognize their authority, you've restored them. And how do you recognize their authority? You keep the festivals according to when they designated they were to be kept according to the priestly calendar. So I'd like to submit to you that the restoration of the Zadok priesthood is a part of the restoration of all things, as it says in Acts 3:21. It's a part of restoring the fallen tabernacle of David, and it's a part of the ministry and the message of Elijah. So I got a few more minutes, which I'm going to use. And so we are going to remember that in Luke chapter 1, we are told about an event that happened in the temple. And the event was the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist and the prophecy that was given that he would be of the spirit and the power of Elijah. So, why did this happen in the temple? And what was the message to the temple and the leaders in the temple? The Messiah is going to come. Okay? So now we're told about a prophecy that Zechariah makes in the temple. In Luke chapter 1, verse 67. Luke chapter 1, verse 67, it says, and his father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied, saying, blessed be the Lord God of Israel. He has visited and redeemed his people. Now that's a phraseology for Messiah coming to end the exile. Okay? And then it says in verse 71 that we should be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all those that hate us. That we would be saved from our enemies. That's the judgment of the nations that took Israel into captivity. That they would be judged and we would be saved from all those that hate us. In other words, the end of the exile. And it says, verse 74, that he would grant unto us that we, being delivered out of the hand of our enemies, might serve him, the Messiah, without fear. We will serve the Messiah in holiness and righteousness all the days of our life. We will serve him without fear, without worrying about our enemies. You know what period of time this is prophesying about? The Messianic era. Zacharias is prophesying about Messiah coming to ultimately end the exile and to bring about the Messianic era. So all the temple, this was such an event that happened in the temple. The angel of the Lord's there, and Zacharias can't speak, and then he's prophesying. The Pharisees probably didn't like the prophesying part. But he's prophesying, and the temple is being told that the one that precedes the coming of the Messiah, the Elijah ministry, John the Baptist, he's now being born, and what precedes him is the Messiah. The temple was told that the Messiah was coming. Okay? But you know what they chose to do? Luke chapter 7, Luke chapter 7 and verse 30. Luke chapter 7 and verse 30. Did y'all find it?
Yes.
Luke chapter 7 verse 30, it says, "But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the counsel of God against themselves, and they refused to be baptized of John the Baptist." Why? It was announced in the temple that he's of the spirit and ministry of Elijah and the Messiah's coming. Why did they refuse to be baptized under him? I mean, why didn't they like him? You want to know why they didn't like him? Because he grew up in the Qumran and he was a Zadok priest, and they followed a calendar and they kept the festivals different than what the Pharisees and the temple system did. And it was a challenge to their authority. And they didn't like the challenge to their authority. They says, "We're not recognizing you." All right? So, for those of you who know a little bit about the Dead Sea Scrolls, for those of you who've ever been on a trip to Israel, you would have gone, should have gone, to the Qumran. And can I give you a little bit of a summary of what happens when they take you to the Qumran? You're going to go in there and they're going to show you about a 2 or 3 minute movie, and they're going to say, well, this is kind of how life was. They got up, they went to work, and they came back, and they all sit together, and they had a meal, and they kind of did it. Then they went out and they got mikvah. Oh, by the way, go out and look at the mikvah baths. And they had this belief about this end time war, about the sons of light and the sons of darkness. And so it was an end time battle. So, by the way, go out and look at the mikvah baths. The bus is leaving in 20 minutes.
That's right.
That's right. That's it.
12 minutes.
Is that about right?
Yeah.
12 minutes.
All right. So they tell you about, they had this belief about this end time battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, but they don't explain what the battle was about. You know who the Qumran community called themselves in the scrolls? They called themselves the sons of light. Why did they call themselves the sons of light? Because they followed the right calendar, under the right leadership, the Zadok priests. And who did they call the sons of darkness? The Pharisees. The temple system. You know why? Because they followed a Babylonian calendar. And it's a very, very, very serious thing to the God of Israel to destroy the holiness of time. The festivals are his appointed time. It's holy. And you're destroying the holiness of time. So did they not believe that this sons of light and sons of darkness was an end time battle? Right? Yes, they did. So now, John the Baptist, go to Matthew chapter 3. Somebody says, where's all this what's all this stuff about the Qumran, the calendar? Like, where's it at in the New Testament? Once you get the background, it's everywhere, okay? Just because it doesn't say the word Qumran, or it doesn't say the word calendar, you think it's not there because you don't read the word. The word calendar. All right. Matthew chapter 3. And we're going to read verse 7. But when John saw many of the Pharisees and the Sadducees come to his baptism, remember, they wouldn't be baptized of him, right? Luke 7:30, they wouldn't be baptized of him. When they saw many that came to his baptism, he said to them, O generation of vipers, who has warned you to flee from, are you ready for this? From the wrath of God. The wrath to come. You know what the wrath of God is? It's the end time judgment of God. Revelation chapter 6 verse 7. Revelation chapter 6 verse 17. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who will abide? So John says to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, you're not going to escape the end time judgment of God. Well, no, where did he get this thought that they're not going to be able to escape the end time judgment of God? In the war scroll, the sons of light and the sons of darkness, that battle was over a calendar. And so he's saying to the sons of darkness, you're not going to be able to escape from the wrath to come. They didn't like him because it was challenging their authority. and they refused to be immersed of him. All right, I got a couple more things to show you, and then I'll be done for this session, and then we will be awaiting for the final session tonight. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we are going to go to, I think it's Matthew in chapter 21. Okay, I got it. Matthew chapter 21. For those of you who are trying to find it, we're going to begin in verse 23. Matthew chapter 21. In verse 23. Okay? Did y'all find it? Okay, it says, when he had come unto the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him. That's Yeshua. So the temple authorities are coming to Yeshua and says, by what authority do you do these things? And who gave you this authority? Why are they asking about his authority? Because he doesn't submit themselves to their authority. They think that they're the authorities. So he says, well, by what authority do you do this? Now, catch this. Who is being accused? Yeshua is. They're saying, by what authority, Yeshua, are you doing this? Now, in a normal human response, if you come up and accuse me of something, you know what probably is going to be the first word that comes out of my mouth? I. I'm going to be saying something about myself to defend myself, right? So you're accusing me, I'm going to say, well, I didn't do that. I'm going to say I. So did the words that come out of Yeshua when he was being accused, did he say, I? Well, let's see what he says.
Yes, not about him.
He says, Yeshua said, I will ask you one question. Tell me. And if you answer this question, I'll tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John. Time out. What does the baptism of John have anything to do with Yeshua's authority? The way that he's answering, by what authority are you doing this, is he says to the temple authorities, to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the chief priests, etc., they're saying, no, the baptism of John. So why does he bring up the baptism of John? Because they don't accept his authority. They don't accept that he's the Elijah ministry. And why don't they? Because he's following a different calendar. Not their authority, not their calendar. He says, the baptism of John, is it from heaven or from men? Okay, now why did he ask him that specific question? Why did they say, is the baptism of John from heaven? You want to know why? Because even today, the Orthodox Jews have a doctrine of it is not in heaven. The Torah is not in heaven.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, the Torah was given to man. Man makes the rules. It's not in heaven. But you know where in the Qumran, where they believe the authority of the calendar came from?
Heaven.
It came from heaven. So he asked them, did John? It says, did he come from heaven or men? Well, if they say heaven, then they have to abide by heaven, right? So they can't say heaven. But they said, but if we say men, then we fear the people, because everyone thought that John was a prophet. And so he said, so they answered, well, we can't give you an answer. And Yeshua said, I'm not going to give you an answer either. So you see, there's this battle over authority. And they didn't accept the authority of John the Baptist because he was in the Qumran. He grew up in the Qumran and he followed a different authority. He was under the authority of the Zadok priests. So the last thing I'm going to share with you is the Sadducees. Who are the Sadducees? Now, the Sadducees have the name of the Zadoks. Sadducee is Zadok. Zadoks. I'm going to read to you from the website Sepharia.org. This is an Orthodox Jewish website where they have all the Torah portions and the commentaries about it and everything underneath the sun. And so here they explain the following. And this comes from what they call the minor part of the Talmud, okay? So it says, Simon the Just was the last of the generation who considered that the knowledge of the Torah and its interpretation was the exclusive privilege of the priest. So it always came from the high priest down, right? And so it got changed that we're not looking after the authority of the high priesthood anymore. And this says Simon the Just was the last of the generation that considered that the priest had the authority. And Simon the Just had numerous disciples, and among his numerous disciples were many non-priests. And Antigonus of Soho was one of the non-priest disciples. And he came to occupy the position of Simon the Just in continuation of scholastic development. Then it says, the name Antigonus, which is Greek, is characteristic of the time. Then it goes on to say, this was the saying, that they would teach the following. When you serve God, be not like servants who serve their master with an expectation of receiving gifts, but rather be like servants who serve the master without expecting gifts, and the fear of heaven will be upon you. Two of the disciples of Antigonus of Soho, he's a non-priest. Two of the disciples of this non-priest are Zadok and Boethus. Zadok and Boethus. And Zadok and Boethus, because of the reasoning among themselves regarding this saying, Zadok and Boethus decided that they weren't going to follow the oral Torah. And it says that Zadok and Boethus founded a new mode of living, and they organized a new party which came to be known as the Sadducees and the Boethusians. The Sadducees comes from this student of Antigonus of Soho, who was a non-priest, who decided not to follow the oral Torah. And the name of one of those students happened to be Zadok. And from this Zadok comes the Sadducees. So the Sadducees are not the Zadoks of the Qumran. They have the name, but they're not the Zadoks of the Qumran. And the Zadoks of the Qumran had, and the belief system of the Zadoks are like, and the belief system of the Zadoks and the Qumran and the belief system of the Sadducees are completely different. Now, somebody who doesn't study the background of all this, they will say, well, the Sadducees were the Zadok priests, the Sadducees were in the temple, so therefore Ezekiel 44 says we got to follow according to the Zadoks, which is the Sadducees, which is the Babylonian calendar. And so hopefully I've given you enough information in this teaching to help you to understand the history of the high priesthood of Israel, that it comes down through and it's ultimately in the authority of the Zadok priests. And these Zadok priests, when the temple got corrupted through the influence of the Greek Seleucids, they got kicked out. The Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, they took upon themselves the position of the high priesthood, and the faithful Zadok priests, they went to the Qumran, and they went there to preserve the priestly calendar and to await for the coming of the Messiah from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. So that's why they had John the Baptist, and he knew the prophecy in the temple that he was of the spirit and the power of Elijah. So that's why when the Messiah came, John the Baptist was in the Qumran. That's why they ended up believing that he was the Messiah And they didn't have a name for him at first, so they called him the Way. They called him the Nazarenes. And this is the Jewish roots of our faith in Messiah that we now, in order to go forward in restoration, we need to embrace this Jewish roots of our faith. And I'll explain more the connection to Acts 2 in the next session. So I pray the message has been a blessing to you, and may Yeshua receive all praise, glory, and honor. So it's going to be time for us to